She was introduced to the whole ballroom as my future wife before she had ever once called me by name. The morning it started, I was pressing a wrinkle out of a black polyester vest with the flat of my palm because Larkspur Catering did not believe in irons for the staff, only for the tablecloths. B stood behind me at the mirror in the service hallway, pinning her hair with the concentration of a surgeon. "Voss Tower," she said. "Full house. Board, press, the works. You know whose engagement they're announcing tonight." I did not know. I did not care to know. I had learned, in the 3 years since Kestrel and Vane put my name on a list that traveled faster than any resume I could send out after it, that the people who owned rooms like the one I was about to enter did not remember the women who refilled their glasses. That was the arrangement. I stayed invisible, I stayed paid, and at the end of the month there was enough left over for Sam's dialysis copay, and, if the tips were good, a new blade for the coffee grinder that had been dying since spring. I touched the little tin in my apron pocket before I clipped the tray to my hip. Chamomile, loose leaf, half empty. My mother's ritual, not mine, except that it had become mine the year she died, and I had nothing else of hers small enough to carry. The ballroom at Voss Tower occupied the 40th floor and looked like a chandelier had detonated in slow motion. I moved through it the way I moved through every room like it, close to the walls, counting exits out of habit I had never managed to unlearn. 2 behind the service bar, 1 past the string quartet, 1 I was not supposed to know about, behind a panel near the kitchen, because I had read the fire code taped inside Larkspur's van door, out of boredom on a slow Tuesday. A man in a burgundy tie crossed near the canap table and used the word restructuring the way other men used the word inheritance. He was talking into a phone, low, fast, just get the Marchetti transfer classified as a loan before the audit committee meets. Isolde wants it buried by Friday. I did not decide to remember it. Numbers simply stuck to me the way other people's song lyrics stuck to them. Uninvited, permanent, restructuring loan, Marchetti, Friday. I filed it the way I had filed 1,000 irregularities at my old desk, in the part of my brain that used to be paid to notice things like this, and now noticed them for free, for no one, out of habit that had cost me everything once already. I was still holding that thought when the tray tipped. It was not my fault. A woman in green silk backed into me, reaching for a passing waiter's canaps, and 11 glasses of champagne became, for 1 full second, a chandelier of their own, arcing gold across white marble and my own black vest. The room did that thing rooms like this do, a ripple of laughter that was really contempt wearing better shoes. "Watch where you're standing," the woman in green said, not to me, through me. As if I were the spill and not the person holding what had spilled. I was on my knees with a cloth napkin, already calculating how many broken flutes would come out of my check, when a voice above me said, flat and cold enough to lower the room's temperature by degrees I could feel on my arms, she was standing exactly where the service line was told to stand. Perhaps ask the event planner why that line crosses a walking path before you ask her anything. I looked up. She was not tall in a way that should have filled a room, and yet the room had already rearranged itself around her. Waiters and board members alike angling their shoulders toward her the way plants angle toward a window. Black suit, no jewelry except a single ring worn on the wrong hand for an engagement no one had announced yet. Her eyes found mine for exactly as long as it took to confirm I was not hurt, and then moved on, already dismissing the moment as handled. Cold cardamom and riverstone reached me before her voice had finished, a scent so precise it felt less like perfume and more like weather. "Get her a new vest from the coat check," she said to no one in particular, already walking away. "And somebody find Isolde. We're behind schedule." Bea appeared at my elbow with a fresh cloth, eyes enormous. "That was her," she whispered. "That was Camille Voss." I did not know yet what that name would cost me or what it would give me, only that for the first time in 3 years, someone in a room like this one had looked directly at me and seen a person instead of a uniform. I had exactly 40 minutes left before she said my name for the first time, in front of 400 witnesses, and changed the shape of my whole life. The 40 minutes passed in the ordinary currency of the job, trays and thank yous, and my own reflection, ghosted in silver domes. I was refilling water glasses along the dais when I first saw the woman they called Isolde Marchetti, a silver-haired presence in ruby red who moved through the room collecting deference the way other people collected coats. Beside her stood a younger man with his mother's watchful eyes and none of her patience, adjusting his cufflinks every few seconds like a tell he had never learned to hide. "Julian," Bea murmured beside me, refilling from the other side. Her son. "Word is tonight's the night. Merger of the family trusts, sealed with a wedding." I did not think about it again until the microphone crackled to life at the head table, and Isolde Marchetti rose with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had already written the speech in her head 100 times. "Tonight," she said, "the Voss and Marchetti families complete a partnership 3 generations in the making." Her eyes found Camille Voss at the edge of the dais, and something in her smile did not reach them. "Camille, darling, won't you come say a few words and introduce our newest addition to the family?" I watched Camille Voss go very still, the particular stillness of an animal deciding whether to run. Julian Marchetti stepped forward with the easy assurance of a man who had never once in his life been told no and meant it. The room held its breath the way rooms hold their breath before a verdict. I was 3 feet away, refilling a water glass no one had asked for, when Camille Voss turned, crossed the space between us in 4 strides, and closed her hand around mine. "Actually," she said, loud enough to carry to the back wall, her voice not shaking at all, though her pulse under my fingers absolutely was, "there's someone I'd like you all to meet first." 400 faces turned toward me at once. I felt the room's collective breath catch the way mine did. "This is Ren," Camille Voss said, and her hand tightened around mine like a woman gripping the edge of a cliff she had just decided to jump from. "My future wife." The silence that followed had a texture I could have cut with a knife. Isolde Marchetti's smile did not move, but something behind her eyes recalibrated with the speed of a woman rewriting a ledger in real time. Julian Marchetti's cufflink adjusting stopped entirely. I had 30 seconds to decide whether I was about to be the punchline of the worst joke of my life or the answer to a question I had not yet understood I was being asked. My mouth, entirely without my permission, decided for me. "Hello," I said to the room, in the same voice I used to use presenting audit findings to men who did not want to hear them. Steady, unbothered, a voice built for rooms exactly this hostile. "Sorry about the champagne earlier. I promise I'm usually better with my hands." A laugh rippled through the crowd, real this time, breaking the tension like a held breath finally released. I felt Camille Voss's grip on my hand ease, just slightly, and heard, very quietly, meant only for me. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest. "Ask me again once I know which," I said. Isolde Marchetti's applause, when it came, arrived a half-second after everyone else's, and landed like a verdict I had not agreed to accept. She did not let go of my hand until we were behind a service door 2 hallways away, in a stairwell that smelled of cold concrete and, faintly, of her. Cardamom and riverstone thickened now with something sharper. Adrenaline, maybe fear, worn well enough to pass for calm. "I am so sorry," she said. and it was the first thing she had said to me that sounded like it cost her something. I panicked. Isolde has been maneuvering that engagement for 8 months, and I could not stand there and let her win, and you were the only person in that room who wasn't already a chess piece. So you made me one instead. I made you an offer, if you'll let me finish it before you decide I'm a monster. She exhaled, and the cold precision I had watched her wear like armor in the ballroom cracked just enough to show the exhaustion under it. 3 months. Play my fiancé in public. I will pay you enough to clear whatever debt put those shadows under your eyes. And when it's over, you walk away with your life fixed and my thanks. No one gets hurt. No one but me finds out it isn't real. I thought of Sam's dialysis bill, folded in my coat pocket where I could not stop touching it, and of the particular arithmetic of being 29 years old and still counting exits in every room I entered, because competence had once cost me my whole career and taught me never to trust a room that seemed safe. Define hurt, I said, because in my experience, arrangements like this one always find someone to spend. Something shifted behind her eyes, recognition instead of offense. Then let's make sure it isn't you, Camille Voss said, and held out her hand a second time, this time as a question instead of a rescue. Tell me to stop asking, and I will. Don't stop, I said, before I had fully decided to, and stepped, for the first time in 3 years, out of the invisible line I had spent my whole adult life standing behind. The car that took me out of the city that night was longer than my entire apartment. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, counting the exits out of habit. 2 doors, a partition, a driver who did not once look back. While Camille Voss sat across from me with her coat still buttoned like armor she had forgotten to take off. You'll stay at the house, she said. There's a wing that's separate. Mrs. Ibarra will show you where everything is. We'll need a story people believe, which means we need each other's basic facts before the next event, which is a fundraiser Thursday. You planned this to the day already. I plan everything to the day. It's how I've survived this family. She looked out the window at the city thinning into hedgerows and gates. Isolde will investigate you. She investigates everyone. Whatever she finds, I need to hear it from you first. I thought about Kestrel and Vane, about the letter that ended my career for the crime of refusing to sign off on numbers that didn't add up, and said nothing, because 3 hours into a lie was not the moment to hand a stranger my whole ruin. The house, when we reached it, was not a house. It was a fact about the world I had simply never had reason to learn. Glass and stone rising 3 stories into a sky, gone the deep bruise blue of full dark, lit from within like something that had never once worried about a bill. Mrs. Ibarra met us at the door in a cardigan the color of oatmeal, took one look at me, and said, before either of us could speak, you've eaten nothing since noon. Sit down. I'm fine, I said, out of reflex, the way I always said it. You are pale, and you are gripping that little tin in your pocket like it's the only friend you brought with you, Mrs. Ibarra said, not unkindly, already moving toward the kitchen. Sit down. I sat. Camille Voss sat across from me at a kitchen island bigger than my whole bedroom, and for the first time all night looked less like an heiress and more like a woman who had not slept properly in longer than she'd admit. You don't strike me as someone who panics, I said, while Mrs. Ibarra moved between the stove and the pantry with the unhurried competence of someone who had fed this family through worse nights than this one. I don't. Camille's jaw worked once, which is why tonight frightened me more than it should have. I have spent 8 years building a wall around every decision Isolde could use against me. Tonight I threw a stranger through it, instead of thinking, I have a name. Ren. She said it carefully, like a word in a language she was still learning to pronounce correctly. Ren, I'm sorry. It won't happen again. The not thinking part. I'm very good at thinking. So I gathered from the itinerary. The ghost of something that might, in a kinder light, have been a smile crossed her face and was gone before I could be sure I'd seen it. Mrs. Ibarra set a bowl of something that smelled like garlic and thyme and childhood in front of me, and I ate like a person who had forgotten, until that exact moment, how hungry 3 years of careful rationing could make a body. "What is that?" Camille asked, nodding at my hand where it had gone, unthinking, back to the tin in my apron pocket even now, at the table, in borrowed safety. "Tea, my mother's kind. It's stupid. It isn't." She watched me with an attention that felt, for one unguarded second, like being fully lit for the first time in years. Nothing a person carries through a night like tonight is stupid. I did not sleep that first night so much as lie very still in a bed the size of my old apartment, listening to a house that had no traffic noise, no upstairs neighbor's television, nothing but silence so complete it felt like its own kind of pressure. Somewhere down the hall, I would learn later, Camille Voss was awake too, standing at a window with a photograph she had not shown anyone in 3 years, and I did not yet know her well enough to feel the shape of that grief through the walls between us. Only that something in this house was already older and sadder than the lie we had agreed to tell. By the second week, I had learned the geography of a life I did not belong to. The east wing where I slept, all pale wood and windows, was Mrs. Ibarra told me with the careful neutrality of a woman choosing not to elaborate, the wing Camille had built after her fiancé died, because she could no longer sleep in the rooms they'd shared. Fiancé, I repeated, the word landing somewhere under my ribs I had not expected. Elena Reyes, CFO of Voss Continental. Once, a car accident, 3 years back this spring. Mrs. Ibarra's hands did not stop moving through the bread dough on the counter between us, but her voice went careful in a way I was learning to recognize. Camille has not been the same since, though she would tell you she has. Don't repeat that I said so. I filed it the way I filed everything, next to the man in the burgundy tie and his phone call about a loan and a Friday deadline, next to the particular way Isolde Marchetti's smile did not reach her eyes. I was not investigating anything. I told myself that daily, the way a person tells themselves a lot of things they already suspect are lies. Camille found me on the terrace that evening, where I had gone to be alone with a book I wasn't reading, and set a mug down beside me without a word. Chamomile, brewed properly, in a cup instead of the tin I'd been steeping in a chipped mug from the staff kitchen for years. "Mrs. Ibarra mentioned the tea," she said, sitting at the far end of the bench like a woman testing whether the distance was appropriate. "I had some scent from a place in the city. It's better than whatever you've been drinking. You didn't have to do that." "I know." She looked out at the grounds instead of at me. "I wanted to." We sat for a while in a silence that had, somewhere in the last 2 weeks, stopped being uncomfortable. I found myself watching the way she held stillness, not the practiced stillness of the ballroom, but something looser, off-duty, a woman who spent her whole public life braced and had apparently decided this particular bench did not require bracing. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Julian Marchetti. What happens if you don't marry him?" Her jaw tightened, just slightly. "The family trust has a clause. If the Voss and Marchetti lines don't consolidate by my 35th birthday, Isolde's branch gets controlling votes on the board." My grandfather wrote it thinking he was protecting the company from outsiders. He didn't anticipate that the greatest threat to it would come from inside the family he trusted with it, and you'd rather marry a stranger you invented at a party than let that happen. "I'd rather do almost anything than let that happen." She turned to look at me then, fully, and the cold precision I'd first seen across a ballroom had softened into something raw. Isolde has wanted control of this company since before I was born. My mother's doctrine was that alphas marry for the empire, never for the heart. That sentiment is a weakness the family cannot afford. I believed her for a long time. Long enough that I don't entirely trust myself to know the difference anymore between duty and choice. "What do you think this is?" I asked. "What we're doing?" "I think," she said slowly, "it started as duty. I'm no longer certain what it is now." The air between us had gone charged in a way I recognized from every romance I'd ever privately mocked and now, apparently, was living inside. She did not move closer. I noticed with some part of my brain that never stopped noticing things, that she never moved first, not once, not toward anything she wanted. "You can," I said quietly. "Move closer, I mean. If you want to. I'm not going to break. I know you won't. I'm more concerned about what happens to me if I do and you don't want me to. Ask me, Ren." My name in her mouth had, in 2 weeks, become a different word than it had ever been in anyone else's. "May I?" "Yes," I said, and she closed the distance slowly enough that I could have stopped her at any point, and did not, and the kiss when it came tasted like chamomile and felt absurdly like the first true thing that had happened to me in 3 years. We broke apart to the sound of a car in the drive, headlights sweeping the terrace, and Camille's whole body went taut beside me like a wire pulled to its limit. "That's Isolde's car," she said. "She's early. She's never early." She stood, smoothing her jacket, the terrace-softened woman folding herself back into armor in the space of one breath. "Whatever she says tonight, don't react. She's testing you." I did not yet understand how thoroughly. I only knew, watching Isolde Marchetti step from the car with a leather folder tucked under one arm and a smile that had never once reached her eyes, that whatever was coming had already been decided before she arrived. Dinner was served in the formal room I had not yet been shown, and Isolde Marchetti sat at the foot of the table like a woman who had built it. Julian sat beside her, cufflinks still, eyes darting between his mother and me like a boy watching a fuse he had not lit, but knew was burning. "Ren," Isolde said, once the soup had been cleared, her voice warm in the particular way of a woman who had never once used warmth without a purpose behind it. "I took the liberty of learning a bit about you. Due diligence, you understand. Camille's family has been burned before by people who wanted access more than they wanted her." Isolde, Camille said, a warning in one word. "It's fine." Isolde's smile widened. She opened the folder. Ren Calloway, formerly of Kestrel and Vane, Forensic Accounting, terminated 3 years ago. The official record says insubordination. I did wonder what that meant, so I made some calls. She laid a single sheet on the table, angled toward me, though she was performing for Camille. "It seems you accused a senior partner of fraud and couldn't substantiate it. Rather embarrassing, being fired for crying wolf. And now, here you are, engaged to one of the wealthiest women in the state. 3 weeks after serving her champagne, the room went very still. I felt every eye at the table land on me at once, the exact ballroom silence from 3 weeks ago, condensed to 8 people and a folder. "That isn't what happened," I said, keeping my voice level with an effort that cost more than anyone at that table would ever know. "Of course, dear, I'm sure you have your version." Isolde's tone did not change, sweet as poured syrup and twice as calculated. "I only worry, Camille, that you've fallen for a woman with a documented history of making serious accusations she cannot prove. One does hope history doesn't repeat itself, particularly given how much is riding on your judgment this year." Julian's cufflinks stopped mid-turn. He was watching me now, too, with something that might, in a different family, have been sympathy. Camille set down her fork with a precision that was somehow louder than if she'd thrown it. That's enough. Is it? Isolde's eyebrows rose, delicate, deniable. I'm only protecting the family's interests, as I always have. You're protecting your own. Camille's voice had dropped into a register I hadn't heard from her yet. Ice over something molten. Wren was fired because she refused to falsify a client's books to cover a partner's embezzlement. I had it verified the week I met her. I know exactly what happened at Kestrel and Vane, Isolde, which is more than I can say for several things closer to home that have never once been verified at all. The table went silent in an entirely different way. Isolde's smile did not so much fade as recalibrate, the way it had in the ballroom, a woman doing rapid arithmetic behind an unmoved face. I only want what's best for this family, she said finally, closing the folder with a soft, deliberate click. I do hope, for both your sakes, that your judgment proves better than your mother's was. She left soon after, Julian trailing behind her with an expression I couldn't read, and the house exhaled once the door closed behind them like a held breath finally released. You knew, I said, once we were alone. About Kestrel and Vane. You knew, and you didn't say anything. I looked into you the first week, the same as she did. I needed to know what she'd find before she found it. Camille rubbed a hand over her face, and for the first time I saw exhaustion sitting openly on her, no armor left to hide it. I should have told you I knew. I'm sorry. I didn't want you to think I was keeping a file on you. You were keeping a file on you. Yes, at least she didn't lie about it. I am very bad at trusting people without evidence, Wren. It's the thing my mother's doctrine actually managed to teach me well. I thought about Sam, about the medical bills stacked in a drawer at home, about the particular fear of being seen too closely by people who had the power to destroy you with a single folder. What happens to my brother if this falls apart? If Isolde digs into him too? Something shifted in Camille's face, resolve replacing exhaustion. It won't fall apart, and if she comes near your brother, she'll learn exactly how thoroughly I protect what's mine. She paused, hearing the word land, mine, and did not take it back. Was that too much? No, I said, surprised to find it true. It wasn't. The break-in happened 4 nights later, at 2:47 in the morning, and I counted every one of the 11 seconds it took the house alarm to cut through my sleep before I understood what I was hearing. I found Camille already in the hallway outside my room, barefoot, a look on her face I hadn't seen before, something closer to fear than I'd thought her capable of. Stay behind me, she said. And I did, for exactly as long as it took the security team to clear the study downstairs and find nothing taken but a single drawer forced open, papers scattered, a framed photograph knocked face down on the desk. Camille picked it up with hands that were, for the first time since I'd known her, not steady. A young woman with a warm smile, dark hair, laughing at something outside the frame. Elena, I said quietly. It was not a question. Someone wanted this drawer specifically, Camille said, not answering, staring at the photograph like it might explain itself. Nothing else was touched. Just Elena's old files. Nadia Osei arrived within the hour, Camille's head of security, a woman built like a closed door who had regarded me with open suspicion since the day I moved in and had not yet found reason to soften it. She surveyed the study with a professional's eye and said, flatly, whoever did this had the code to the east gate. This wasn't a random break-in. Isolde, Camille said. I can't prove that yet. Nadia's eyes flicked to me, assessing, and something in her expression shifted, fractionally, toward something less hostile. But I'll find out. I stood in the wreckage of that study, looking at a photograph of a dead woman Camille had clearly never stopped loving, and felt the first real doubt of the whole arrangement settle into my chest like cold water. "Why does Elena's old file matter to whoever did this?" I asked. "What was in it?" Camille was quiet for a long moment. Elena was CFO. 2 months before she died, she told me she'd found something in the books that troubled her. She never told me what. I always assumed the accident was exactly that. An accident. Her voice cracked, just slightly, on the last word. I have spent 3 years not letting myself ask the question you just asked. I thought of the man in the burgundy tie at the gala, 3 months and a lifetime ago now. Classify the Marchetti transfer as a loan before the audit committee meets. Isolde wants it buried by Friday. "Camille," I said slowly, "I need to see everything you have of Alana's financial files. Tonight, if you have them." "Why?" "Because I think I might already know what she found." We spent what remained of that night at the kitchen island with 3 years of scattered financial records between us, and somewhere around dawn, over cold coffee and a silence that had stopped being about the ruined study and started being about something far larger, Camille told me the rest of it. The doctrine her mother had raised her inside like a second skin, love as weakness, control as the only safety a Voss could count on, and how Elena had been the first crack in that armor. And losing her had convinced Camille the doctrine had been right all along. "And now," I said, "you introduced a waitress as your future wife at a party instead of doing the one thing your mother trained you to do." Now, Camille agreed. "I'm starting to think my mother was wrong about almost everything." She looked at me over the ruin of paperwork between us, unguarded in a way I would come to recognize as rare and precious in her, a woman who had spent her whole life protecting a wound by never naming it. "I don't want this to be a lie anymore, Ren. I don't know when it stopped being one for me." But it did. It stopped being one for me somewhere around the second cup of tea, I admitted. She reached across the ruined papers and found my hand, and this time, neither of us pulled away when the touch became something more, and this time, when I asked, softly, "Are you sure?" She answered without a single second of hesitation, "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," and the kiss that followed tasted like coffee and dawn and every version of safety I had spent 3 years, convincing myself I did not need. The months that followed were, against every instinct I'd built to survive alone, happy ones. Camille taught me the names of the trees on the grounds, badly, mixing up the oaks and the elms every single time on purpose, because it made me laugh. I taught her, in turn, to read a balance sheet the way I read one, not as numbers but as a story someone was trying to tell without saying it out loud, and watched something in her light up at the discovery that my strange, career-ending competence was, to her, simply extraordinary. "You see the whole shape of it," she said one evening, watching me trace a discrepancy through a decade of Voss Continental filings, with a pencil and a patience that had once cost me everything. "The way I see a shipping route. It's not the same skill. It's the same gift. It got me fired. It got you fired from people too small to deserve you," Camille said, simply, and meant it so completely that I had to look away before she saw what it did to me, being believed like that after 3 years of no one believing me at all. I told her about Sam over dinner one night in early autumn, about the diagnosis at 19, the transplant list, the years of scraping together pays on a waitress's wage, while my forensic training rotted, unused, in a drawer of rejected resumes. I told her about the telescope he'd wanted since he was 12, the one I could never quite afford, and watched her file it away the way she filed everything. Quietly, permanently, without comment. I did not know yet that she had already begun, without telling me, moving pieces on his behalf, transplant specialists quietly consulted, a scholarship fund established in his name at the university he'd had to defer from. I only knew that for the first time in 3 years, someone was carrying weight alongside me instead of watching me carry it alone, and that the weight shared felt almost bearable. We were in the kitchen on a Tuesday, laughing about something so small I would later be unable to remember what, when Nadia appeared in the doorway with her phone in one outstretched hand and an expression that emptied the room of warmth in a single second. "You need to see this," she said. "It's live in 20 minutes on 3 networks." Isolde got to a producer. The story, when it broke, ran under a headline designed to be quoted rather than read. "Heiress's secret fiancé, a disgraced fraudster, leaked documents suggest." My photo from Kestrel and Vane's staff directory, 3 years old, ran beside a doctored version of my termination letter, edited just enough to make the word insubordination read like the word convicted. My phone would not stop ringing. Larkspur Catering called within the hour to inform me, with visible regret, that they could no longer keep me on staff, given the press attention. Then the second call came, from Sam's transplant coordinator, informing me with careful, clinical language that the scholarship fund covering his care had been abruptly frozen pending an internal review, a review that had begun. The coordinator admitted when pressed, the same afternoon the story broke. I found Camille in the study, standing over the same desk where the photograph of Alana had once lain face down, on a call with the board that I could hear through the door before I ever opened it. "I understand the stock dipped 4 points," she was saying, her voice stretched thin as wire, "but I will not issue a statement distancing myself from her that isn't a pause." "Yes, I hear you." I said I hear you. She hung up and turned to find me in the doorway, and something in her face, some careful, practiced coldness I hadn't seen since the first night I met her, had come back to sit behind her eyes like an old coat pulled back on. "They want me to make a statement," she said, "distancing the company from you until the review clears your name. It would only be temporary, would it? Ren, say it like it is, Camille, not the boardroom version." My voice was shaking now, and I hated it. Hated that 3 years of learning to stay steady in hostile rooms had abandoned me in the one room I'd stopped bracing for. "You're going to stand in front of cameras and pretend you don't know me, so your stock price recovers, while my brother's medical fund sits frozen because of a lie your own family manufactured. I am trying to buy us time to prove it's a lie. You're trying to protect the company, which is what you've always been trained to do." I understand it. I do. I felt something in my chest give way, quietly, the way a floor gives way, all at once and somehow slowly. "I just didn't think I'd be the thing you protected it from." She reached for me and I stepped back, and the space between us, that had closed so carefully over 4 months, opened again in a single afternoon, wide as the day we'd met. "Give me 48 hours, Camille said, and there was something in her voice, underneath the exhaustion, that sounded almost like begging, a register I had never once heard from her. "I will fix this. I will find out exactly what Isolde did, and I will end her for it. I just need you to trust me one more time." I looked at her. At the woman who had pulled me out of an invisible life 4 months ago and called me her future wife in front of 400 strangers, and felt the old fear rise up anyway, the fear that had followed me since the day Kestrel and Vane decided competence and honesty were liabilities worth firing. "I don't know how," I said quietly, "when trusting people is the thing that's ruined my life twice now." I turned and walked toward the east wing, toward the room that had been mine before it had ever felt like ours, and did not look back to see whether she followed, because I already knew from the silence behind me that this once she hadn't. I spent that night packing the few things I'd brought with me 4 months ago, and it was somewhere around midnight. Folding a sweater I barely remembered owning, that my hand found the loose thread of memory I had been too heartbroken to pull at until now. Restructuring loan. Marchetti transfer. Classify it before the audit committee meets. Friday, I sat down on the edge of the bed I would not be sleeping in tonight and let the forensic part of my mind, the part that had cost me everything once, finally do what it was built to do. I did not sleep. By 4 a.m, I had spread every financial document Camille and I had gathered in the study across the guest room floor, cross-referencing them against a name I had heard once, in passing, at a party, from a man in a burgundy tie who had never once looked at me long enough to remember my face. The pattern, once I saw it, was so clean it was almost elegant. 3 years of quarterly transfers routed through a shell entity, registered to a Marchetti family trust, each one timed within days of a board audit, each one classified, every single time, as a loan that was never repaid and never meant to be. Elena had found this. I was certain of it with a certainty that settled into my bones like cold water. Elena had found this 2 months before her car went off a road she had driven 1,000 times before, in weather that, according to the report I found buried in Camille's old files, had been clear. I found Nadia in the kitchen at 5 a.m. because some instinct told me she, of everyone in this house, would believe me fastest and act on it without needing to be convinced twice. I need you to look at something, I said, and spread the documents across the counter between us. And then I need you to tell me if I'm right that this is exactly what got Elena killed. Nadia studied the pattern for 11 long minutes without speaking, her expression sliding from professional skepticism into something colder and far more focused. "Where did you learn to read a balance sheet like this?" she said finally. "It's the only thing I've ever been good at. It's also the thing that ended my career, because 3 years ago I found a pattern almost exactly like this one, and no one believed me." "I believe you." Nadia looked up, and something in her hard, gruff face had, for the first time since I'd met her, fully softened. In 15 years working for this family, I have never once seen Camille wait for anyone the way she has waited for you these last 4 months. I did not understand it until right now, watching you do this. She gathered the documents with sudden, decisive purpose. "Get dressed. We're going to need Camille awake for this, and we're going to need her furious." Camille was in the study when we found her, hollow-eyed, clearly having not slept either, and the look on her face when she saw me standing in the doorway with Nadia and a stack of evidence was one I would remember for the rest of my life. Hope arriving somewhere it had stopped expecting to be welcome. "I was wrong to walk away last night," I said, before she could speak. "I panicked because trusting people has cost me everything before. But I think I just found the reason Elena died, and I think it's the same reason Isolde is trying to destroy me, and I am not walking away from this family a second time without a fight." Something in Camille's face broke open. Relief and grief and fury arriving together. "Show me," she said, and for the next 3 hours, in the gray light of a morning none of us had slept through, I walked her through 3 years of theft disguised as loans, laid the pattern beside the coroner's report on Elena's crash, and watched Camille Voss's carefully controlled composure give way, piece by piece, to something that looked, finally, like the truth arriving all at once after 3 years of being denied entry. "She killed her," Camille said, very quietly, staring at the documents like she could set them on fire with her eyes alone. "Isolde had Elena killed to protect an embezzlement scheme, and then spent 3 years grooming her own son to marry me so she'd never have to answer for it." "We can't prove the crash yet," I said. "But we can prove the money. And once the embezzlement is public, the crash investigation reopens on its own." Nadia was already on her phone, voice low and urgent, arranging something none of us had asked her to arrange. "The shareholder meeting is Thursday," she said, lowering the phone. "Full board, full press. If we're going to do this, that's the room to do it in." Camille looked at me across the ruin of papers between us, 3 years of grief and 4 months of fear compressing into a single, steady decision. "Will you stand up there with me?" she asked, not as a lie this time, as exactly what you are. "Yes," I said, without a second of hesitation this time, and meant it more completely than I had ever meant anything. The shareholder meeting convened at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning in a room built for exactly this kind of theater, oak paneling and a long table and rows of chairs filling with board members and press who had, 4 days ago, been fed a story designed to end me. Isolde Marchetti sat at the head of the table in ruby red again, composed, certain, a woman who had never once lost a room in her life. I wore the same black I had worn the night of the gala, not the catering vest this time, but something Camille had chosen for me, tailored, deliberate, the mirror image of every mocking green silk woman who had ever looked through me instead of at me. I felt the weight of the room's attention land on me the way it always did, except this time I did not flinch from it. Camille stood first. "Before this meeting proceeds," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room without needing to be raised, "I want to address the story published 4 days ago regarding my fiancé, Ren Calloway." She let the silence stretch, the same silence I remembered from the ballroom, and this time did not wait for it to swallow her. That story was fabricated. And the person who fabricated it has spent 3 years fabricating something far more serious, which Ren uncovered in less than a week. I stepped forward and did not let my voice shake. "My name is Ren Calloway. I was a forensic auditor for 11 years before I was fired for refusing to bury a finding almost identical to the one I'm about to show you." I opened the folder Nadia had prepared, and the documents projected onto the screen behind me. 3 years of transfers, clean and undeniable. This is a pattern of embezzlement totaling over $11 million, routed through a shell trust and disguised as loans, timed precisely around every audit committee meeting for 3 years. Every transfer traces back to accounts controlled by Isolde Marchetti. The room's temperature dropped the way it had the night of the gala, except this time the cold was aimed somewhere else entirely. Isolde rose slowly, her composure a half-second too late to be convincing. "This is absurd. A waitress with a grudge and a doctored spreadsheet? The spreadsheets aren't doctored," I said, calm, level, the voice I had spent 11 years building for rooms exactly this hostile. "They're yours. And I think you know that better than anyone. Because I think Elena Reyes found this same pattern 3 years ago, 2 months before her car went off a road in clear weather, after she told her fiancé she'd found something troubling in the books." The room went utterly silent. Julian Marchetti, seated near his mother, had gone pale as chalk. "That is a vicious accusation, with no evidence," Isolde said. But her voice had thinned. "The financial evidence is on that screen," Camille said, stepping forward now, and the cold in her voice was not performance, was not armor, was 3 years of grief finally given somewhere to go. "The crash investigation reopens the moment this board votes to refer these findings to the district attorney's office, and I intend to make sure it happens today, in front of every person in this room." Isolde's mask did not so much crack as detonate, all at once, 3 decades of careful composure collapsing into something raw and furious. "You have no idea what I sacrificed to protect this family's future," she said. And it was, I would realize later, the closest thing to a confession she would ever give. "Your grandfather built an empire and handed it to a girl who wanted to marry for love instead of protecting what he built." Alina would have destroyed everything the day she opened her mouth about that audit. "I did what was necessary. I have always done what was necessary." "You murdered her," Camille said, very quietly, and the words landed in the silent room like a verdict already rendered. "You murdered the woman I was going to marry, and then spent 3 years grooming your son to take her place, so no one would ever ask why." Security arrived within minutes of the board's unanimous vote to refer the findings. Isolde escorted from the building past 400 cameras, and every board member who had once deferred to her, Julian trailing behind her in stunned, publicly shattered silence. Camille found my hand in the chaos that followed and held it in front of every remaining camera in the room. No longer a lie dressed up as an announcement, but something entirely, finally true. "Ask me," she said quietly, under the noise, her thumb tracing once across my knuckles. "Ask me if I mean it now." "Do you mean it?" I said. "I have never meant anything more in my life," Camille Voss said, and kissed me in front of the same board that had once demanded she distance herself from me, and I felt the whole room's opinion of me rearrange itself in real time, the way it should have 4 months ago, the way it finally actually did. The scent gland at the base of her throat, when I pressed my lips there that night in the quiet after the cameras had gone, before anything more, carried cardamom and riverstone, gone warm, gone soft, and I felt her breath catch under my mouth. "Tell me to stop," I murmured, "and I will." "Don't," Camille said, voice wrecked and certain in equal measure. "Don't stop. Ask me for anything tonight, and the answer is yes." "The bond," I said. "Only if you're sure. I need you to be sure, not grateful, not relieved." "Sure." She pulled back just far enough to look at me, cold cardamom eyes gone entirely warm. I have been sure since a woman covered in champagne looked up at me from the floor of my own ballroom and made an entire room laugh instead of cry. I have never been more certain of anything. She tilted her head, baring the pale line of her throat, an offering and a question at once. "Please." "Yes," I whispered, and the bite, when it came, was gentle as a vow, and the bond that opened between us afterward felt like a door I hadn't known was closed, finally swinging wide. Her relief and her love and 3 years of grief finally allowed to soften pouring into me alongside my own, until I could not have said any more where her feeling ended and mine began. Isolde Marchetti's trial concluded in the spring, 11 months after the shareholder meeting that ended her, with a conviction on 23 counts of fraud and a reopened investigation into Elena Reyes's death that resulted, 6 weeks later, in a second conviction for manslaughter. The mechanic who had tampered with the brakes having finally, faced with the embezzlement evidence, traded his silence for a lighter sentence. Julian Marchetti, cleared of any knowledge of his mother's crimes, resigned quietly from the board and moved to a city where no one recognized his name, and sent, some months later, a short letter to Camille that read only, "I'm sorry for what she made us both into. I hope you're happy." I believed him. Larkspur Catering called to offer me my old position back within a week of the trial's verdict. I declined, with more grace than I felt, and opened instead a small forensic accounting practice 3 blocks from the house Camille and I had, by then begun calling ours together. Its first client, the very scholarship board that had once frozen my brother's medical fund, and now wanted, urgently, an audit proving their new leadership's integrity. Sam's transplant took place on a Tuesday in early winter, successful, uncomplicated, and Camille was in the waiting room with me for all 9 hours of it, holding my hand the exact way she had held it that first night in a ballroom neither of us had known would change everything. The telescope she'd bought him, the good one, the one I could never have afforded on a waitress's wage, arrived at his apartment the same week he was discharged, with a card that said only, in her precise handwriting, "For all the stars you've been waiting to see properly." He called me in tears. I understood exactly why. Camille proposed properly on a night in early spring, on the same terrace where she'd first brought me tea in a real cup instead of a chipped mug, kneeling with a small box that held, not a diamond, but a garnet the exact color of the tin I still carried in my pocket, worn soft now at the corners from 4 seasons of habit. "I once told you I was very good at thinking and very bad at not thinking," she said, and her voice shook, actually shook, this woman who had once silenced a room of 400 strangers without raising her voice. I have thought about this every single day since the night I panicked and grabbed your hand in front of that entire ballroom. It was the first true thing I'd said in years. Marry me, Ren, not because a trust clause requires it, because I choose you every day, on purpose, for the rest of my life. Yes, I said, the easiest word I had ever spoken, and Nadia, standing at the terrace door with Mrs. Ibarra and Bea and Sam in his new wheelchair with the good wheels Camille had also, quietly, arranged, said, loud enough for the whole terrace to hear, finally, in a tone that made everyone laugh. We married in early autumn, in the garden behind the house, with vows short enough to fit inside a single held breath, and true enough to need nothing more than that. "I promise to see you first in every room I ever enter," Camille said, "the way I saw you that first night, when the whole world was looking through you, and I could not look anywhere else." "I promise," I said, "to stop counting exits in rooms where you're standing, because I finally understand what it feels like to not need one." Mrs. Ibarra, standing beside Nadia in the small crowd of witnesses, pressed a handkerchief to her eyes and declared, to no one in particular, that she had never in 20 years seen this family so thoroughly, so permanently repaired. A year on, the morning light through the kitchen windows fell the same particular gold it had fallen the first week I lived in this house as a lie, except now the tin of chamomile sat on the windowsill in a proper glass jar, refilled every month without either of us ever mentioning it, a small ritual that had outlasted its own necessity and become, simply, ours. Camille stood at the counter across from me, badly mangling the difference between 2 mugs that looked identical, laughing at her own mistake in a way the woman I'd met in that ballroom would never have allowed herself to laugh. I had spent 3 years believing that being seen clearly was the most dangerous thing that could happen to a woman like me, that competence and honesty were liabilities the world would always find a way to punish. I had been wrong. Being seen, it turned out, correctly and completely, by exactly the right person, was not the danger at all. It was the entire point. The end.